Hey, good people. So this week we are going to be wrapping up discussions on the topic of power and inequality, systems of power and inequality. So if you recall, a few weeks ago, we started out with talking about systems of power and inequality based on race. We addressed it based on ethnicity and religion. We addressed it based on capitalism and social class. Gender was last week, and this week we are going to talk about it based on sexuality. And so I want to begin with talking about the first article that we're going to be reading this week. That first article is entitled Prisons for Our Bodies, Closets for Our Minds, Racism, Heterosexism, and Black Sexuality. Whoo! This one goes into, or I should say, this author begins discussions and exploration of the intersectional relationship between racism and heterosexism. Mm. And the power that's kind of there. When we consider the intersecting relationship of that, one of the things that this author talks about is legislation and the power that legislation may have in describing and defining relationships. One of the places, oh, sorry, y'all, one of the places where we see that played out is with an autobiographical movie or depiction of legislation that was on the books here in the United States. And the movie is entitled Loving. And there was legislation that prohibited interracial marriage. So I have just a little clip of information from that movie in the module that I'm going to ask you to read, and think about some of the information that the author addresses in her article. And when you watch the little clip that I have here about Loving versus Virginia, and I just want you to think about, some of the ways that legislation, that law can kind of dictate our thought process, can kind of dictate the move of the cultural norm when it comes down to exploring the ideas or the concepts of race and sexuality. When you are reading through the article and when you're watching this clip, I want you to think about and ask yourself, what is the purpose of legislation, of the laws that prohibited interracial marriage? What was the purpose of it? Ooh, all right, I'm gonna let that one go for right now. Let me get into the introduction for the second article. The second article that we're going to read is by Jonathan Katz, and it is entitled The Invention of Heterosexuality. And what Jonathan Katz talks about in this article basically is the invention of the term heterosexuality, and he explores the link of this term to structural power. Ooh, 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 that structural functional perspective. If you recall, when we went back, if you go back to our discussions and maybe some of the readings on gender, and also the readings on capitalism, and that whole concept of that hegemonic masculinity, that masculine traits, masculine characteristics kind of set the norm for our culture in what we determined was going to be right or wrong, based on what the needs, based on the expectation, and based on the role that one was functioning in. So with this article from Jonathan Katz, as I stated, he is exploring sexuality and the structural functionalism, that macro perspective of what the definition of heterosexuality means, especially when we're looking at the concept of power. Okay, so moving on. So the third article that we are going to be reading this week, again, when it comes down to sexuality, this article has several contributing authors, and it is entitled Good Girls, Gender, Social Class, and Slut Discourse on Campus. Oh, who called somebody out their name? But the authors of this article, they are looking at trying to define and get an understanding of how women engage in slut shaming, to define and to get an understanding of the characteristics that they deem or that they categorize as being feminine. So also in the process, not only slut shaming to define feminine characteristics, but slut shaming in order to regulate the gender performances and expectations of women in particular or specific fields of study. Oh, I mean, I'm talking about some folks going in for the jugular, okay? So these contributing authors, one of the things that they look at is they look at the status, they look at the social class of women participating in this slut shaming. And you would be surprised at one of the things that they point out. I'm gonna give you a little peek inside of that. One of the things that they point out is the difference in slut shaming, what it means from high income female college students versus low income female college students. What does that look like? What does it mean for them? It's not so much based on sexuality as it is to determine, hold on to your hats, y'all, because you know where I'm going, to determine power. And y'all know what goes along with power. The other P word, privilege. Ooh, this article is going to give, it's going to give us something to think about. Maybe something that you want to follow up, maybe with female members of your family. Tell me a little bit about the relationships, the female relationships, and how you all may define one another, other females who may not be in your same social class. How do you define them? How do you view them? How do you find understanding in their behavior, and defining their characteristics? Ooh, this could be some interesting evening conversation around the dinner table. All right, y'all. I know I'm just going all over the place, but just ride along with me. The fourth and final article that we have this week, you all, is this article that is written by Donovan Lessard, Lessard, and this article is entitled "Queering the Sexual and Racial Politics of Urban Revitalization." Now, the author of this article is exploring, again, an intersectional perspective, looking at things from the LGBTQ community and exploring the revitalization of some areas and trying to find the right word, the privilege that some members of the LGBTQ community have over other members of the LGBTQ community. This was something that we briefly explored when we were talking about gender last week, when we were looking at transgender, moving from transgender to trans. And that particular author, I believe the last name was Ryan, that author was looking at advocating for the resources for folks coming from being just falling under transgender to the entire trans community. And some of the resources I believe that we did discuss also fell in line with the area of healthcare. So this article here by Donovan Lessard, Lessard is looking at, again, this intersectional approach, looking at urban ways and urban understanding, urban ideologies, defining LGBTQ based on race and class. And one of the things that he is looking at when we're talking about defining race and class is the process in which neighborhoods and members of those neighborhoods contribute in the thought process, how they contribute in the development of or the promotion of standards that may be imposed upon members of the LGBTQ community, where they are looking at these standards and determining who is of value, meaning who is more privileged versus who is not valued or who is not privileged. So what members of the LGBTQ community have the privilege and which members are still oppressed. So these are the articles that we're looking at this week, y'all, when we're talking about sexuality. So I encourage you to read these articles. There is going to be a few videos that I'm going to also post in the module. One of them is entitled The Gay Myth, and it is a TEDx talk where this gentleman who is presenting information kind of helps us to debunk, the whole idea of the gay myth. And looking at how are we defining and how are we moving away from defining members of the LGBTQ community as being oppressed and including them in this area where they begin to feel empowered. Okay, so there will be that video, and there will be another video on sexuality excuse me, in the module. There will also be your discussion questions that will be posted along with your homework assignment. All right, so if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact me by phone, or you can send me an email on my college email. All right, good people, I bid you love, peace, and soul. All right, I'll see you on the discussion board.